My name is Rosella Crowder. I'm 18 years old, and this is for every daughter who was told she was being practical while her brother got called the future. 6 months ago, my mother burned my college applications in the kitchen sink while my father laughed at my SAT score. 1,470. Then he looked at me and said, "Save the money for your brother. Trevor's going D1. They thought that ended my future. It didn't. It just proved they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because by then, I'd already submitted every application online. They didn't know where I'd spent my summer. And they didn't know what my grandmother sealed inside the final letter she left behind before she died. By Thanksgiving, there were 22 people around our table. Trevor wore his football jersey like he was already famous. My mother poured wine. My father carved the turkey. And every person in that house acted like they already knew which child mattered more. Then the phone rang. My mother answered it, and I watched the color drain out of her face. "You mean my son?" That was the moment the lie my family had been living on finally began to split open. If you've ever been made to feel smaller inside your own home, stay with me. And if this story hits somewhere personal, you can tell me in the comments where you're watching from. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how we got there. Let me take you back to the night it all started. May 15th, 2025, 7:30 in the evening. I was sitting at my desk upstairs when the SAT score email came through. I'd been refreshing my inbox every 10 minutes for 3 days. My hands were shaking when I clicked it open. 690 in math, 780 in verbal. I stared at those numbers for a full minute. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It wasn't perfect. I knew kids who'd scored 1,500, 1,600. But it was good. It was really good. Good enough for the schools I'd been researching since freshman year. MIT Caltech, Stanford, Princeton. I printed the score report. The paper was still warm when I walked downstairs, and I remember how the edges curled slightly, how the ink smelled like possibility. Dad was in the living room watching football highlights. Trevor sat next to him on the couch, controller in hand, half paying attention to the TV and half playing some game on his phone. I stood in the doorway holding my printout, and I can still remember the exact pattern of light from the TV flickering across their faces. "I got my SAT score," I said. Dad glanced over his shoulder. "How bad?" The question didn't surprise me. It should have. Maybe. But it didn't. That's what happens when you're a daughter in a house that only sees sons. 1470, I said. He turned back to the TV. Laughed. Not a cruel laugh. At least, I don't think he meant it to be cruel. Just dismissive. Like I'd told him I got a B on a quiz that didn't matter. "That's cute, Rosie. Real cute." Trevor looked up from his phone for half a second, then back down. I caught his eye for just a moment. Something flickered there. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort. But he didn't say anything. Dad kept talking. "Trevor got 1080 and he's going D1. You think colleges care about tests anymore? They want athletes, leaders, kids who can do something, not just fill in bubbles." The paper in my hand felt suddenly heavy, like all those hours I'd spent studying, the weekends, the late nights, the practice tests, had just been erased. I stood there for a long moment. I was thinking I could apply. Apply where? He didn't look at me. "We've talked about this. College is expensive. We're putting everything into Trevor's future. He's got a real shot." "But scholarships." "Rosella." Mom's voice came from the kitchen doorway. I hadn't heard her walk up behind me. Her arms were crossed. Her face was set in that expression I knew too well, the one that meant the conversation was already over. "We've already decided. The money we've saved is for your brother. He needs camps, recruiting videos, visits. You're smart enough to figure out life without spending $100,000 we don't have. Need-based aid could... No. Dad's voice was flat, final. We're not filling out those forms. We're not spending our time on applications for schools you won't get into anyway. Trevor's the one with the future here. You're practical. You'll be fine. Practical girls stay close to home. That phrase, practical girls, I'd heard it my whole life. Practical girls don't dream too big. Practical girls don't ask for too much. Practical girls make room for their brothers. That was it. Conversation over. Dad turned up the volume on the TV. Mom went back to the kitchen. Trevor still hadn't looked up from his phone. I walked back upstairs, put the score report in my desk drawer, closed it quietly. My hands were shaking, but not from excitement anymore. From something else, something colder. And then I opened my laptop. I'd been working on my college applications for 2 months. 8 schools. Common App was already filled out. Supplemental essays were done. I'd written about the telescope I built in 10th grade from a kit I bought with babysitting money. About the summer I taught myself Python and built a program to track local weather patterns. About how I'd always looked up and wondered what it would take to build something that could go there. 2 days earlier, May 13th, 9:47 p.m., I'd hit submit on every single application. Online, digital, already sent. I pulled up my email and scrolled through the confirmations. Your application to MIT has been received. Application ID 2025-E A-09384. Thank you for applying to Caltech. Application ID 2025-EA-17839. Stanford University confirms receipt of your application. They could burn every piece of paper in this house. It wouldn't matter. I closed my laptop and lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. There was a poster of the Andromeda Galaxy above my headboard. I'd put it up in 8th grade. Grandma Eleanor had bought it for me at a museum gift shop. She was the only one who ever asked what I wanted to be when I grew up. The only one who listened when I said aerospace engineer without laughing or changing the subject to Trevor's football stats. I thought about her a lot that night. She'd died 2 months earlier, March, just after my 17th birthday. Heart attack, sudden. Grandpa Dale found her in the garden, kneeling next to the tomato plants she'd been teaching me to grow since I was 7. At the funeral, he'd pulled me aside and pressed something into my hand, an envelope, sealed. My name written on it in Grandma's precise handwriting. Your grandma wanted you to have this, he'd said. But not yet. She told me I'd know when it's time. I'd tried to ask what it was, but he just shook his head and walked away, tucking the envelope back into his jacket pocket. I didn't know then that the envelope would change everything. But that's the thing about the truth. It doesn't need you to know it's coming. It just waits. The next night, Mom came into my room while I was reading. She didn't knock, just walked in and saw the stack of envelopes on my desk. 8 of them, pre-addressed to 8 different admissions offices. I'd printed them out weeks ago, before I knew I'd be submitting online. They were backups, just in case. Relics from a version of this story where I still believed my parents might change their minds. She picked one up, turned it over, looked at the return address. What is this? College applications. I thought we told you. I worked hard on them. I just wanted to. She didn't let me finish. She called Dad. Loud enough that I heard Trevor's footsteps stop in the hallway outside my room. He was listening. Dad came upstairs, took one look at the envelopes, and said, "Bring them downstairs." Why? Now, Rosella. I followed them down to the kitchen. My stomach was in knots. I knew what was coming. I could feel it. Trevor was at the table eating leftover pizza. He looked up when we walked in. Our eyes met for a second. He knew too. Mom spread the 8 envelopes out on the counter like evidence of a crime. MIT, Caltech, Stanford, Princeton, Cornell, Carnegie Mellon, Georgia Tech, University of Michigan. "You've been wasting time on this?" she said. The fluorescent kitchen light was too bright. It made everything look stark, clinical. I could see every line on her face, every bit of disappointment. "It's not wasting. We told you. Trevor needs this money. You're smart enough to get by without college. You don't need some expensive degree to figure out life." Dad picked up the Caltech envelope, read the address. His face hardened. "These places cost $70,000 a year. You think we're made of money? Financial aid? We're not doing it." He dropped the envelope back on the counter. "This is final, Rosella. You're going to have to accept that not everyone gets to go to college. Some people are built for it. Some people aren't. You're practical. That's a good thing. Practical girls stay close to home, get jobs, help their families. There's no shame in that." Mom gathered the envelopes into a pile. Her hands were steady, certain. She walked to the sink, turned on the faucet slightly, just enough to dampen the bottom of the steel basin. Then she dropped the envelopes in and pulled out a lighter. "Mom." She lit the corner of the MIT envelope. It caught fast. The orange flame spread to the others. I watched the paper curl and blacken. The addresses melted away. The ink ran like tears down the white paper before it all turned to ash. The smell hit me, that acrid, chemical smell of burning paper. It got in my hair, in my clothes. I can still smell it sometimes, even now, months later. "This is for your own good," Mom said, watching the flames. "You'll thank us later." Dad stood next to her, arms crossed. "Trevor's recruiting video cost us $6,800. We're investing in winners, not in fantasies." I looked at Trevor. He was staring at his plate, jaw clenched. Wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted him to say something. Anything. But he didn't. The envelopes burned down to ash, gray and black and curled at the edges. The smoke detector didn't go off. The ventilation fan above the stove pulled most of it out. Mom ran water over the ashes until they dissolved into gray sludge and washed down the drain. The sink made a hollow gurgling sound. "We're not being cruel," Mom said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "We're being realistic. Girls like you, smart, practical. You don't need a fancy degree. You can work, save money, help the family. That's valuable too. Girls like you. Not girls like someone else. Girls like me. Girls who don't get to dream." Dad called after Trevor. "Come on, champ. Let's watch your highlight reel again." Trevor stood up, looked at me for just a second, opened his mouth like he was going to say something. Then he followed Dad into the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, alone. The sink still smelled like burned paper. My hands smelled like it too. I turned on the faucet and washed them 3 times, but the smell wouldn't leave. I went back upstairs, opened my laptop, and checked my email one more time. "Your application to Caltech has been received. Application ID 2025-EA-17839. Submitted May 13th, 2025, 9:47 p.m. The timestamp stared back at me. 2 days before they burned the backup copies. 2 days before they thought they'd stopped me. They could burn paper. They couldn't burn what I'd already built. That night, lying in bed, I got another email. My phone buzzed on my nightstand. I almost didn't check it. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. But something made me reach for it. Subject line: NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. Internship decision. My heart stopped. I'd applied on a whim back in March, the same week Grandma Eleanor died. I was sitting in the funeral home during calling hours, watching relatives I barely knew tell stories about her, and I'd pulled out my phone and filled out the NASA application right there. Didn't tell anyone. The application asked for a transcript, an essay about my interest in aerospace, and 2 teacher recommendations. I'd submitted it at midnight and figured I'd never hear back. I clicked it open, read it once, then again, then a third time to make sure it was real. Congratulations! You have been selected for our summer internship program at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, Propulsion Systems Testing Lab. Paid position, $18 per hour, 40 hours per week. Program dates, June 2nd through August 15th. Please confirm your acceptance by May 22nd. I sat up in bed. Read it again. NASA Marshall was in Huntsville. I lived in Huntsville. The facility was 22 minutes from my house. I could do this without anyone knowing. I hit reply. Typed one word, yes. Sent it at 11:43 p.m. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, at the Andromeda poster, and thought, this is it. This is how I build something they can't burn. June 2nd, 6:30 in the morning. The sky was that pale pre-sunrise gray. I borrowed Mrs. Patterson's car, our 78-year-old neighbor who didn't drive anymore. I'd been mowing her lawn since I was 14. When I asked if I could use her old Honda Civic for the summer, she handed me the keys and said, "Don't crash it, honey, and eat something before you leave. You look too skinny." I drove to NASA Marshall. The roads were empty. I had a granola bar in one hand and my phone in the other, GPS guiding me through streets I'd never taken before. When I pulled up to the security gate, my hands were shaking. I showed my ID. The guard checked a list, nodded, and waved me through. I parked in visitor parking. Walked to building 4500, got my badge at the front desk. MS-2025-INT-1138. They took my photo. I looked terrified in it, but I didn't care. They gave me a lab coat, a hard hat, a folder with orientation materials, and then they told me to report to Dr. James Whitmore. He was waiting for me in his office. 52 years old, 25 years at NASA. Graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, coffee mug that said, "Failure is not an option, but it is data." He had a reputation for being brilliant and for not suffering fools. He looked at my badge, looked at me. "You're the youngest intern we've had in 5 years," he said. "Don't waste it." That first day, he took me on a tour of the propulsion test stands, massive concrete structures where they fired rocket engines and measured thrust, temperature, fuel efficiency. The test stands were huge, stories tall, covered in sensors and blast shields and scorch marks from previous tests. When they fired an engine during a test run that afternoon, the ground shook. The sound was like thunder compressed into a single roar. I felt it in my chest, in my bones. It was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I stood there, hard hat on, safety goggles fogging up slightly, and I thought, this is where I belong. Dr. Whitmore had to shout over the noise. "Most people talk about going to space. We build the things that get them there." I worked 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Test data analysis, computational modeling. I sat in on design reviews where engineers twice my age argued about nozzle angles and combustion chamber pressure. I learned CAD software, helped run simulations on propulsion efficiency. Every evening, I drove home around 6.